So the presentation I'll be giving you today is going to be looking at the problem in a bit more of a holistic sense. I'm going to try and understand our position in the built environment in the context of the information age. In the information age, essentially the fourth industrial revolution or the digital revolution. What does it mean to architectural product, engineering product, but also the built environment and design process? So in order to understand what the goal is, we need to think about what we're trying to achieve. And at its core, what we're trying to achieve is, of course, sustainable development. Now, if we consider sustainable development, it's obviously gone through many iterations of definition, but if I bring it back to its core definition, it's the ability of an environment to meet the needs of current and future generations. And at its heart, that's a very important concept to grasp. And I don't think it necessarily needs to change, because what we're considering is that the decisions we make today will reap benefits in perpetuity. Now, if we look at, for example, the top map, you can see in a variety of colors the cost of internet around the world, the cost of data. So if the darker colors are red colors, or the cheaper colors, or the cheaper areas, and the lighter colors are the more expensive areas. That's an easy way to immediately see that there's a problem. In the areas that require development, in the areas where inequality is the greatest, the cost of data is the most expensive. That seems ridiculous. Now here's another interesting one, the central map. That's router density. So there are your Wi-Fi hotspots. That's an area that your built environment can actually make a difference, for example. So your Wi-Fi hotspots are concentrated in those areas that are developed. That's fantastic for them, but what does it mean to all the other white zones that are in desperate need of data? Have a look at the population density. They're not equitably distributed according to those graphs. We need to do something about that. What can our cities do to bridge that gap themselves? Now, obviously, this is with regards to the availability of current infrastructure. I think, last month, Tesla just launched their BFR rocket to see if they can put up one of 4,000 satellites to beam free internet across the globe. That might change things. That'll be an interesting scenario, and might be interesting to see how that changes the shape of our smart cities when digital infrastructure becomes maybe even negated as a requirement. With regards to the effective use of ICTs, we must never turn our back on it. ICTs are here to stay. ICTs, information and communication technologies. And ICTs are essentially, in the context of this presentation, involved in the production of knowledge. And knowledge can be summarized in two ways. We have tacit and we have explicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is that knowledge I can download from Google telling me what the latest stock price is, or defining what the problem of, or what the definition of a particular problem is. And tacit knowledge is that knowledge which I get from interacting with you. And we can't think about knowledge as mutually exclusive of either of those. It has to be developed in tandem. And that's where the built environment can still play a role, because the tacit, the supply of knowledge is as integral to knowledge-based development as anything else. That's how culture is disseminated. That's how ideas are passed along from the more experienced to the less experienced. So that's why the built environment can still have a role to play. But how do we enable it? So we need to remember that the heart of sustainable development in the knowledge-based society, in order to bridge the digital divide, it has to be based around human need. It's human-centric. Without human need, without human beings, development is an irrelevant concept. Development has to occur around human beings. But of course, that has to be undertaken within the context of ecological and environmental constraints. There's the societal issues and the economic issues. Our triple bottom line is still as relevant as ever. But in the context of the information age, knowledge is an important criteria as any. If we're creating environments that aren't facilitating the dissemination of knowledge, the creation of knowledge, and even the management of knowledge, we're not creating smart environments. And that is a measurable constraint or a criteria, just as it is that to understand what the ecological constraints of a development are. We can actually measure to what degree our knowledge is being disseminated. If we can tie all of these together, now we've got a framework that we can apply and measure the efficiency and practical implementation of a sustainable development approach. And this is the goal to which the built environment needs to move. And it's through this that we can actually start to bridge this digital divide that I'm talking about, because it becomes a people-centered problem as opposed to a technology problem. What's interesting about that is it's not something to be resisted. There's actually going to be an immense contribution to global GDP as a result of automation and information and artificial intelligence. We can't turn our back from it. We have to be participatory to that process. But an interesting other aspect to mobility is this graph. This was also produced by Deloitte. I don't really need to go into too much of the detail there, but if we have a look at the top row, you can see that this represents, by virtue of a color pie chart, the amount of work that an average employee can actually do on his cell phone to do his job. So Deloitte, where you find, for example, lower status employees and skilled industrial employees, they represent the bulk of the workforce, maybe 60, 70% of the workforce, can actually do their job on their cell phone. Why do they need a $1 billion building in Waterfall? It doesn't make any sense. So why are we still building buildings and designing buildings to accommodate a need today, when we need to be thinking about the need that's going to be around the corner? And we'll probably find that those graphs will color deeper and deeper and deeper the more that next year there'll probably be much bigger slices of green. So this is the world we're inheriting. And we can't be blind to it, but we do need to consider the way that that affects how we develop our cities in the future. And the more that we can embrace this, the more that we can start to realize that the dissemination of knowledge can actually be embraced and integrated into our building solutions. So where is a smart city taking us? Digital overlay of a city, pervasive systems to create an interconnected digital and physical environment. Essentially what I'm saying there is that computing is invisible now. It's not in our faces, it's happening around us. What you can call, what they like to call ambient social infrastructure. It's happening. We need to tap into it, we need to lock into it. You know, the rise of mobile wearable technology I was talking now, it's changing the way we experience our environments. So we no longer are reliant on our physical environments to inform or improve, or solely rely on our physical environments to inform or improve our day-to-day. That's then augmented according to our own personal expectations and needs. So, are our cities part of the solution? Where is the architect, the built environment professional in all of this? And in order to answer that question, maybe we go back to the beginning. What were we taught when it came to design? This was a graph that was I used to study from back in university, just trying to define the design process. It starts from a brief and you work through a series of constraints and you get yourself to a product at the very end. You do a little bit of testing and you document your lessons. That's good, and that to some degree in the way that we work today is facilitated and enhanced by building information modeling. It's been around for 10 years, it's getting better and better, and it's unlocking the potential, or even greater potential, through computational and generative design. That's absolutely fantastic. But what that essentially is talking, or where we need to evolve from that, is that we need to think about ourselves not as the producers of products. The city is not a static element. What we're producing are solutions, and solutions are living. We're producing systems, we're not producing products. And the emphasis needs to be on the process of producing those systems. The answer is not achieved through an isolated approach or the particular application of a specific technology. It's achieved through an integrated systems design approach. And that's going to require a little bit of rewiring of all of my brains, including my own. But the real importance is that the job is not done when construction is complete, when we hand over the keys. That's only the start. Sustainable development requires that we consider the generations that are going to follow, that might want or not want to use that building or that precinct or that city. That we define or change the scope of our environment and our profession to be contributors to the entire life cycle of that intervention. And in doing so, we can start to create the conditions for the city and for our built environments to achieve the role of an enabler, in which case we can then have a better role in actually bridging that digital divide that I was talking about, because the emphasis becomes on the user experience, the emphasis becomes on the dissemination of knowledge, it becomes on how we participate, both as producers and as well as users. Thank you.